Pittsburgh Penguins will look to get a Rocky Mountain high tonight against the Colorado Avalanche, and Pat and I are going to preview that game right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on all social media platforms at Synonym for Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. So, Pat, the Penguins go through their final little mini Western trip for this season. They play the Avalanche tonight in Denver. They will then go to Sin City, Las Vegas on Friday to play the Vegas Golden Knights at the 10 o'clock start. Tonight's a 9 o'clock start. And then they'll finish this road trip against the Minnesota Wild over the weekend. That'll be a 3:30 start time on Sunday for the Penguins. So 2 more late night games for you all. 9 o'clock again tonight, which is honestly not that bad. And then Friday, 10 o'clock, but everyone stays up late on Friday. So no excuses for the late night owls for Friday. It's different if it's a Tuesday or Wednesday game, Pat. I get if people have to work the next day, but hey, Friday night, 10 o'clock, watch the game, even though we know the team is not very good. But Penguins will be playing the Avalanche tonight. Sidney Crosby, Nathan MacKinnon, what else could you ask for? And no, people, Sidney Crosby is not going to get traded to the Colorado Avalanche. Can we please stop bringing that up every single day around trade deadline day? It is never going to happen. But speaking of this Avalanche team, they are playing well. You know, they're in a playoff spot right now. They are 4th in the Central Division. They have the first wildcard spot in the Western Conference, 35-24-2 record, good for 72 points. They are 7 points up on the Vancouver Canucks right now, also 7 points up on the Calgary Flames, who occupy that final playoff spot in the Western Conference. It's looking more and more likely to me that they're either going to get A, that first wildcard spot, or B, the 3rd spot in the Central, which would mean a potential date against the Dallas Stars, or they could play Vegas in the first round, which, by the way, sign me up if we get that. But this Avalanche team, they're continuing to play really well. You know, Nathan MacKinnon, he is doing it all once again this season. 23 goals, 91 points in 61 games. Once again, a prime contender for the Hart Trophy. Cale Makar, 22 goals, 67 points in 61 games. He's the best defenseman on the planet. Artturi Lehkonen has 24 goals this year. But outside of that, you know, they already traded Mikko Rantanen to Carolina. We'll touch on that in a second. They're not getting as much offense from this lineup. It's still more of a top-heavy lineup. I will say, since Nichushkin has come back, he's been really good. And hey, breaking news, when one of your best players comes back, you know, it makes your team harder to play against. But I still think this team, when I look at it right now, it's a bit too top-heavy. If the Penguins are able to hone in on their big guns, they will have a shot of winning this game. But once again, as we discussed regarding Toronto, you try to get into a track meet against this team, you're going to lose every time. We kind of saw that on display in the first meeting. The Avalanche were playing fairly well. The Penguins made it a game, Pat, especially in the late stages of the second period. But then Colorado kind of turned it on in the third period, and it was over from then on out. So once again, you cannot turn this into a track meet against the high-flying Avalanche with MacKinnon on the team, Makar, Nichushkin back, et cetera, et cetera. Lehkonen has also been fantastic this year.
Yeah, you're definitely right about this Colorado team being pretty top heavy, because you look at their top 3 scorers. Nathan MacKinnon leads the entire league with 91. Marty Necas is right behind him, excuse me, with 68.
13 points in 12 games since that trade. I will say this, man, I didn't really think much of it from Colorado's perspective. I'm kind of like, they're not really getting fair value back as much, but Necas has been an amazing fit. He's doing wonders on that team.
Yeah, he's been a great fit, and you can see he's really turned it on in Colorado. But again, he has 68 points. Cale Makar has 67, and then there is a steep drop off. The next closest out of their top 3 is Artturi Lehkonen with 35. Now, he's only played about 50 games, so had less of a runway. But then even after that, Casey Middlestat with only 33, Devon Taves, still a defenseman, but 29 points. Drouin with only 25, but he also has only played 28 games. But like you said, you look at this team and it's their big 3 getting it done. It's Cale Makar, now Marty Necas, and Nathan MacKinnon. So this realistically, I don't want to overinflate expectations here, but it really is a case of if you can manage those three players, you have a pretty good shot against this team because once again, they've gotten it somewhat figured out in net with Mackenzie Blackwood now being their starting goaltender. He's got a .916 save percentage, but realistically, we're not looking at this team the same way we looked at Toronto over the weekend, where it's a very well-balanced team with some great top-end talent, solid defense, and good goaltending. Blackwood obviously has stabilized their goaltending situation. He is a solid goaltender. But again, you look at this Colorado team, and it's their top three players getting it done. And everybody else, while they're still doing fine enough, you would like to see those numbers pumped up. However, the one thing I mentioned was they dealt with a lot of injuries early on in the year and into the halfway point of the season. They're starting to get healthy.
Yeah.
So a lot of the players that you may look at their stat line right now and think, that's a really underwhelming season. They've been out for a while. So this is a pretty perfect storm for the Colorado Avalanche as we get even closer to the Stanley Cup playoffs, because they have the clear, obvious top-end talent, and the guys that they need to contribute down the lineup are getting healthy and looking a lot like the players they're supposed to be.
I will still say I think they need a little bit more help in their bottom six. And if you ask me, I think they need a second line center. Like right now, they have Casey Middlestat manning that, and he's fine. But is he a second line center on a Stanley Cup contender? Probably not. So I think if he's your 3C and the Colorado front office is able to go out there and get a 2C before the deadline on Friday, I think that will bolster their lineup even more going into the playoffs. But if the Penguins can play that top line of MacKinnon, and Natchez to a draw, along with Cale Makar and Devon Toews out there at the same time, they will have a shot at winning this game. You really just have to hold them in check as much as you can while letting your other lines go to work. Because again, I know the Penguins forward lines aren't that deep, but I also know it's kind of the same with Colorado, especially after their top line. Like, yeah, their second line is fine. Nichushkin's playing really well. Jonathan Drouin's having a decent year. Casey Middlestat is fine, but their bottom two lines are really not much to write home about, if you ask me. I mean, neither are the Penguins, but again, if you can keep them in check as much as you can, hold them to basically a draw, especially when you have Crosby out there against MacKinnon, the Penguins will have a shot at taking them down and winning this game in Denver, I think.
Yeah, and that'll be really tough for the Penguins because MacKinnon, aside from the obvious of, his best friend Sidney Crosby plays for the Pittsburgh Penguins, he's feasted against the Penguins in his career. He has played 21 games against the Penguins, 26 points, 9 goals, 17 assists. So he likes playing the Penguins. And we love to talk about on this show Penguins killers, and there's a handful of them on the Colorado Avalanche. Just said Nathan MacKinnon. Devon Toews has registered 10 points in 10 games against the Penguins. Another guy who likes playing the Penguins.
Jonathan Drouin.
Yep, that was the last one I was going to say. Jonathan Drouin, 20 points in 20 regular season games, 10 and 10. So these are some players who know how to play the Pittsburgh Penguins. But again, you look at all the names I brought up. Those are two of their three big names and then one of their better depth guys. So for the Penguins, you know what players you have to key on. And the last thing I'll say is you got a little bit lucky, quote unquote, on Sunday against Toronto that Joseph Woll had a rough game and that it was very much a screw it. It's a Sunday afternoon game. Let's give these people a show. But you can't do this 2 games in a row. You can't get into a track meet against a team like Colorado, because if there's one thing that Colorado certainly has over the Toronto Maple Leafs, Colorado is fast. Mm-hmm. They are a blazing fast team. When you're led by Nathan MacKinnon, that is the exact kind of game that you're going to play. So this won't be like Toronto, where they have some guys up and down the lineup who are talented but not very fast. Colorado is going to make you play 1,000,000 miles an hour. And if you try to get into a track meet with this team with the Penguins' lack of foot speed, it could be a very, very long night up in the Rocky Mountains.
100%. And yeah, obviously I know it's very easier said than done with shutting down MacKinnon, Makar and company. But again, I'm just trying to give the keys for the Penguins to win this game. We've seen them use that blueprint selectively at times. The LA game on the road very much comes to mind. The Washington game on the road comes to mind. They've brought in that style out, again, a few times this season, just not nearly enough. So if that style comes out tonight, once again, they'll have a shot to win this game. But it's still going to be very hard to shut those guys down, especially with the way the Penguins play in their own zone. But I'm just looking for, once again, another great Crosby performance. He loves playing the Avalanche in Denver. And I'll be curious to see which goaltender Mike Sullivan goes with tonight as well. Does he go to Jarry for this game against the Avalanche, or does he go back to Nedeljkovic in this game after, honestly, I thought he played fairly well against Boston. Yeah, gave up the goal on the first shot, but outside of that, I thought he really stabilized them the rest of the way and gave the Penguins at least a shot to come back in this game. But that'll do it for the first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Sergei Murashov was recalled to Wilkes-Barre Scranton on Tuesday. Pat and I are going to give our thoughts on what that might mean for Wilkes-Barre and Wheeling in the second segment. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is Wonderful Pistachios. If you're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious, well, crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for your unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shells variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. And Pat, I did forget to mention during the opening segment, I am curious to see what's going to happen with that Mikko Rantanen situation this week. The Hurricanes paid a lot to get him, but seems like they're not really close on a contract right now. Is Carolina willing to flip him again by the deadline to send him to another contender to maybe that contender signs him? Or is Carolina willing to wait this out and kind of use him as a rental and then see if they can maybe circle back after the season, try and sign him? That's a really fascinating situation that I want to see play out this week. It's going to be interesting because, if he's available, oh boy, that's going to change a lot of things by Friday's deadline. Just want to finally say that.
We will learn a lot about Eric Tulsky as a full-time general manager in this moment, because he is one of those wonderkin general managers that everybody was clamoring for their team to hire, and rightfully so, because he has a great track record. But, if he's able to flip Mikko Rantanen for a bunch of assets because this isn't working out, it'll be a masterstroke. But if he loses another player for next to nothing after giving up quite a lot for them, there could be some bigger questions to be asked about Tulsky's job as a general manager.
I think he's done a really good job so far, and I think he's going to have a really good career as a GM. But yeah, I still want to see if he and also the Hurricanes ownership, Tom Dundon, I want to see if they can get this done either before the deadline or potentially after the season if they try to keep him as a rental. But Sergei Murashov, Pat, he was recalled to Wilkes-Barre Scranton on Tuesday from Wheeling. And I know this has started a whole bunch of speculation. Oh my God, there could be a goalie trade in the works. One of these goalies could be getting packaged for a younger player or something around those lines. Everyone needs to pump the brakes. Pat, you pointed this out to me. I also looked at the schedule before. Wilkes-Barre has 4 games this week. They play tonight, they play Friday, they play Saturday, and they play Sunday. This very well might mean that they just need 3 goalies for this week, because that's a lot of games in a single week. And Wilkes-Barre is trying to clinch its spot in the Calder Cup playoffs. They're going to get in. It's only a matter of time, but they still want to keep playing really good hockey here down the stretch because they're serious about trying to win the Calder Cup this year. Murashov has obviously played really well in Wheeling this year. He's basically unbeatable down there. He's also playing outstanding in Wilkes-Barre when he's gotten the chance. Blomqvist is back down there. Philip Larson just had a really good start over the weekend, Pat, and now Murashov is there. So I know a lot of people are speculating about this, but it's probably just that either A, someone is sick, or maybe someone is a little bit banged up, or B, they just need 3 goalies for 4 games this week.
Right. The biggest difference here is when you look at Wilkes-Barre's schedule this week, they play tonight at home against the Belleville Senators. Then they go to Hartford on Friday to play the Wolfpack. And then they're back home for 2 on Saturday and Sunday. They've got Belleville again on Saturday, and then they've got Syracuse on Sunday. When you compare that to what the Nailers have coming up this week, they're on the road for 3 on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but they're all against the Adirondack Thunder. So it's 3 games in the same place for Wheeling, whereas Wilkes-Barre is going to have to do a little bit of travel. They're playing different teams. So I do think the most likely answer here is that they just want to have some depth at the goaltender position going into this week with the kind of schedule they've got looming. Yeah, of course, there could be an illness, there could be an injury, and yeah, there could even be a trade in the works just because you don't want to see all 3 of those guys on the same roster.
Right.
They have stated as much that they want to get especially Blomqvist and Murashov more playing time so they can continue to develop. They don't want them to be backups. They don't want them to be third goaltenders. So it's a curious decision. And obviously we will see what shakes out tonight, but I do think the most obvious answer here is that Wilkes-Barre has a bit of a heavy schedule this week, and they're just trying to make sure they've got the position shirt up as they push their way towards the Calder Cup playoffs.
I think so as well. It'll be interesting to see who starts in this one, but if they keep all 3 goalies for this weekend's games, all 3, I think Larson will start one, Blomqvist will start one, and then Murashov gets the other. Like, I think that works best because everyone gets to have at least one start. You can rest the other goalie the next night, and then so on and so forth. I think that, again, that just makes the most sense for all 3 goalies in that situation. You don't really want to play one of those guys back-to-back or even one of those guys back-to-back-to-back. That really would not make any sense at all. But I think it's just them having depth. And also, I did see that they needed to have Murashov on the roster by Friday to have him eligible for the AHL playoffs. So, I mean, this move here basically does that. So I think you might see each goalie get one start this weekend. But going forward now with the deadline, 3 days away, man, I'm going to put you on the spot here, my friend. How many players do you think get moved out by Friday? I'm going to say 3. I think 3 players get moved.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am. I think 3 is the minimum number. I think we know Grzelcyk, Beauvillier, and I don't know, throw a wild card in there for whoever your third could be. But I think you're going to see the depth moves that we've been expecting. It wouldn't shock me if there's a 4th and it's somebody that we're not expecting.
Right.
I was, I'm going to, let me pick up the name that I'm about to drop here. I was talking to the GOAT of Pittsburgh sports, Bob Pompiani, at work last night. And I'm still in the camp of Rickard Rakell gets moved this summer rather than at the deadline. But I also think he brought up a good point that there's a lot of teams that really need scoring right now. And there could very well be a team that makes a rash decision at this deadline and says, we will give you the sun and the moon for Rickard Rakell because we need to make our push. And it wouldn't shock me if Dubas gets a call and gets that Godfather offer you can't refuse for Rickard Rakell. And then he can get on with business this summer with, say, Erik Karlsson or the guy we're going to talk about in our final segment, Tristan Jarry. So I think obviously the ones we've been talking about all season long that we think are going to get moved are going to get moved. But I would not be surprised if we see a surprise like Rickard Rakell get moved.
I think with how few sellers there are this year, you could see one of these teams that's a buyer get a bit desperate and be like, okay, we're going to give all this up. What do you say? And I do think that could give Kyle some pause and have him really think about it and potentially pull the trigger if he's getting, say, again, a first, a prospect / another really high pick and a young player coming back. I think if he gets that offer, he'd at least very much consider it, if not take it. But still, at the same time, is he going to get that offer? Because if he doesn't, I am more than comfortable of holding on to him for the rest of the season before exploring this more during the summer, where I still think his value is going to be pretty high. He has 28 goals right now. He's going to have the potential to hit close to 40 by the end of the season. And his value is still going to be, again, quite high, especially with the salary cap going up. Teams are going to look at that $5 million and be like, man, for someone that just scored almost 40 goals in this instance, that's a bargain for us. So we can give up quite a bit to get a player like that. And Carlson, yeah, I know there's been a lot of talk out there, but I still don't see that getting done by Friday. I think that's a summer move. The third player that I think has a decent chance of getting moved outside of Beauvillier and Grizzly is Noel Acciari. Never underestimate the hockey men, Pat. The hockey men love to get the grinders around the deadline. They love getting their fourth liners that can chip in a little bit when needed, kill penalties, all that good stuff. That veteran presence in your lineup, someone that can deliver a hard check. I don't think Acciari would bring back a big return or anything like that. You're probably looking at like a mid to late round pick, if I had to guess. But I still could see a couple of teams come calling. You know, he has a year left on his contract. Teams are always looking for a veteran presence, someone that can deliver big checks, penalty kill, and all the good stuff. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we did see a Pittsburgh-Buffalo trade by Friday. That continues to pop up. Over the last several months, you keep hearing all these reports like, oh yeah, Pittsburgh's talking to Buffalo. They like a lot of their younger pieces. Now with a deadline this Friday, could see that spur some action, especially with how desperate Kevin Adams is and how Kyle Dubas continues to talk with Buffalo. If that doesn't happen, though, could happen this summer. But you keep hearing that noise. Wouldn't surprise me if we get it this Friday.
You beat me to the Noel Acciari one. That was kind of the other player in my head that I think could get moved. And you brought up the exact point that I wanted to bring up about Acciari. He is a classic deadline depth move where he is not going to move the needle. You're not going to get some sort of king's ransom for him, but there are always teams willing to spend a late round pick, a fourth or a fifth, or some kind of contract that they want to get rid of to bring in a guy that can kill penalties, a guy that can play physical. And he is that classic intangible guy that coaches and general managers absolutely love. So that's a player that I don't want to say he has a ton of value because he doesn't, but he has value in the sense that I feel like for what Dubas wants to do, for what he wants to do by getting all these draft picks and all these prospects and do the retool on the fly, Noel Acciari is worth quite a lot to help in that plan, because every general manager, every coach, every team will be like, yeah, we can play that guy in our fourth line, throw a fourth round pick for him, whatever.
Right. And as I mentioned on Monday, he just really doesn't fit where the team is right now. And I think once you move him, you can bring up a younger player to play in his spot on the fourth line. Like, I think he's just kind of blocking a younger player or two at this point. And he really, at least on this Penguins team, he really doesn't serve that much of a purpose as maybe he once did when they first signed him a couple seasons ago, when they were still, at least at that point, all in on trying to make up on a playoff spot. But now, as they're rebuilding on the fly, doesn't really make much sense to keep him on this contract. So if a team comes calling, I definitely think Kyle Dubas will listen. And if he gets a good offer, I think he will trade him by Friday. But I think that'll do it for this second segment. Remember, everyone, once Kyle Dubas makes a trade, whether it's today, Wednesday, Thursday, especially Friday, Pat and I will have a breaking news segment out right after the trade is officially released, and we'll have our full takes before breaking it down even more on the next full episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. But again, that'll do it for the second segment. Coming up to end the show, what to do with Tristan Jarry this summer. That's going to be a big topic of discussion once the season ends. Pat and I are going to give our takes on that right after this. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Tam. So, Pat, Tank Commander Tristan Jarry is back up for potentially the rest of the season. We'll have to see if he gets to start tonight against the Colorado Avalanche. And I'm curious to see how this goes. He can try and rebuild his value a little bit for the rest of the season to maybe entice a GM to maybe buy low on him, or this thing could get a whole lot worse, and I would not be surprised if it gets worse considering how he has played this season. And that leads into our discussion here, what to do with Jarry this summer. Bury him in the minors, buy him out, or trade him. Obviously, to me, a trade is the best case scenario. You might have to attach a sweetener to a team taking that contract, whether it's a high pick, a player, something like that. Penguins already have a boatload of picks over the next few drafts. So if they were to trade him, I really don't think they would mind giving up one of those picks because they have so money, and they're going to be getting more picks back at the deadline and probably over the summer as well, as they potentially take back some players on teams that maybe need to create cap space heading into the summer, Pat. So I think to me, they'd be kind of like, okay, we'll attach one of our 30 plus picks that we have amassed over the next few drafts to get rid of Jarry. And I think that's the road that they would rather go down rather than burying him in the minors or buying him out. Kyle Dubas doesn't like buyouts. I don't think any team likes buyouts. And honestly, you look at this contract right now, it's too much money for too many years to buy him out. I think a trade has to be the situation that they go down for the summer. I just don't think you can buy him out. Like, could they? Yes, they did. They did it with Jack Johnson people, but I really don't think they want to do it, especially with the money that it's going to cost them.
I'm going to disagree with you. I mean, obviously, I think that the ideal world is you find a sucker and make a trade and just absolve yourself of the Tristan Jarry contract. But if you go to Puckpedia and you put Tristan Jarry in the buyout calculator, it actually makes a lot of sense to buy him out, because next year you save $3.6 million on the cap. And then in 2 years, you're paying him essentially what is his contract already at about $5 million. And then the year after that, it's about $4.5 million. And then the last 3, it's under $1 million. And we look at where this team is going mixed with where the salary cap is going. It's not going to be that big of a deal, because I get that those 2 years in the middle where you're paying him 5 and 4, I'd be fine paying him not to play for them, because
I don't know. That's just a lot of money, man, for someone not to be there.
Here's the thing. By that point, you're probably paying Sergei Murashov and or Yoel Blomqvist, and they're not going to command gigantic contracts. They're going to be first year full-time in the NHL deals. They're not going to be expensive. You're still going to have a lot of cap space to spend. And where this rebuild and retool on the fly is going, the same goes for a lot of the players that you're expecting to be big contributors by that point. They're not going to be making a ton of money. And you mix all of that together with, you'll still have cap space if you want to shoot your shot in 2 years. And I really don't see, unless I should couch this a little bit differently. We know Kyle Dubas is a very skilled trading and general manager. I say this about him all the time, and I think the track record speaks for itself. He may not always win trades, but he never loses a trade. You go back all the way to his Toronto days. He may have made some trades that had you scratch your head, but he didn't come out on the wrong side of them. It was either a tie or a win. And the same has held true here in Pittsburgh. The trades he's made, he has done extremely well. So there's a world where he can find a way to move the Tristan Jarry contract in a trade. But I think at the end of the day, buying him out's not the worst idea. You'll have 2 years where it's rough. And I think next year would actually be better, because if you want to maybe take a shot on signing one of those younger players you're going out to get, or even making an offer sheet on an RFA, you will have the money to do it and the capital to do it. And that 5 and then 4 million in 26, 27 and 27, 28 will definitely be a challenge. But again, you're not going to be a team that's so tight up to the cap and have to re-sign so many big names. If you can buy them out, I think it's at least worth exploring.
It's worth exploring, but I think those numbers in the middle, especially, I have Puckpedia up right now as well. Those numbers in the middle, I just think might spook Dubas enough to the point where it's like, I don't really know if it's worth doing this. I'm just going to see if I can attach a sweetener to his contract and get out of it that way. I think that's going to be the avenue that he tries to go down pathwise. But if not, I mean, he's going to obviously have to get a bit more creativity out of that contract. Yeah, he's not going to finish his career in Pittsburgh. It's after this season, one way or another, he's probably done as a member of the Penguins. We'll also have to see if that remains true with Ryan Graves, because I could also see them trying to maybe attach another sweetener to try and get out of that contract. Or if you can just get out of it in general and not even have to attach a sweetener, that's also the dream. But with the way he's played this year and last year, don't really know how likely that is. Honestly, I'd say it's probably more unlikely than it is likely. But
now, see, on the other end of that, the reason I bring up the buyout is if you try to buy out Ryan Graves, it's bad.
Yeah, that's a bad one.
For next year, you'd pay him just a shade under $2.5 million, and then $3 million, $3 million, $3 million, and then under $1 million. So when you look at the two worst contracts on the Penguins in Graves and Jarry, Graves, you may just have to deal with this, and hopefully somebody comes along and tries to save you. Jarry, you have options here. You can bury him in Wilkes-Barre and save about $1 million a year. You can hopefully find a sucker and get him to move. But if you buy him out, it's 2 years of pain. And in those 2 years, what he'll be making is not going to, or what he'll be making against the cap as a result of the buyout, it's not going to be that much of a big deal. It's not like if it was this year or the previous couple years, yeah, $4 to $5 million against the cap, that's a problem.
Yeah.
In 2-3 years, you can live with that, especially if you're not a team that is just bursting at the seams with prime talent that you need to pay.
Well, hopefully it doesn't have to come to that, and hopefully he's able to at least recoup a little bit of value here down the stretch and actually play decently well. So maybe that's a nice little audition for a team or two to come calling during the offseason to try and say like, hey, we saw how he played. We think there might be something still here with this goalie. What do you say about that? Again, that's best, and I mean best case scenario, but I had to throw it out there for everyone. But I think that'll do it for today's episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. Pat and I will be back with another show for you all on Wednesday to recap this game against the Avalanche, make our picks for Warrior Helmet Wednesday, and discuss everything else relating to this team. Maybe there's a trade to discuss. Who knows? Kyle Dubas, he's working around the clock this time of year, as is every other general manager in the NHL, with the trade deadline now only 3 days away. But again, that'll do it for this one. For Patrick Damp, I am Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We both appreciate it, and we'll be back on Wednesday.